Hi, this is Mark Delaney from Systems Manage Limited. We're going to be looking at securing your Tivoli Workload Scheduler environment with Active Directory. So what are the entry points into TWS, the command lines, the command composer, as well as the Tivoli Dynamic Workload Console. So this is IBM's browser that a lot of companies, that will be the main entry point for your TWS users. How securing that with Active Directory will give you a better security outlook overall, but also allow you to manage your users more efficiently and do things like when you customize the console to give some bespoke consoles to users, how Active Directory can make that much easier. We're going to look at some examples and then we're going to go to a live demo just so you can see it in action. To get us started today, if you head over to systemsmanage.com, there's a couple of articles that I wrote a while back which are going to underpin the presentation, the demonstration that we're doing today. In particular, restricting visibility of the plan and database objects with the TWS security file. So regardless of which method that a user accesses TWS, if it's the command line tools like Command and Composer, or if they come in with the Tivoli Dynamic Workload Console, the TWS security file has the final say in what they can see and what they can do. And there's some examples on this blog post that you can take a look at. Another post to look at is how linking TWS to Active Directory is going to improve your overall security profile and ease your administration. So some of the concepts we're going to be doing in the presentation today are covered in this blog post. So why would you want to go to the effort of configuring to Active Directory? What benefits it's going to give you, and how it's going to really aid your security outlook as a whole. And before we get started on the presentation, if you want to subscribe to the Systems Manage blog post, you'll get an email every time there's a new blog post to the website. And also up here you can subscribe to the Systems Manage YouTube channel. You can subscribe to the content and you'll get an email from YouTube every time we put up a new post. And you can also follow us on Twitter @sysmanaged. Okay, on to the presentation. So why would you integrate Tivoli Workload Scheduler and your Tivoli Dynamic Workload Consoles with Active Directory? Well, from a TWS administrator's perspective, it allows you to manage your TWS user base more easily. If you have a master domain manager, a backup master domain manager, and several Tivoli Dynamic Workload Console servers, if you're still using local operating system accounts and someone joins the company, you'd have to go and create an account on each of those 4 servers. If someone leaves the company, you'd have to go and clean up those local operating system accounts on each of those servers, which just increases the maintenance overhead unnecessarily. So a massive point on the security aspect is you can grant or deny access to all of your TWS environment and your Tivoli Dynamic Workload Consoles with one click. So what I mean by that is if TWS itself and the consoles all have a single point of authentication, which is Active Directory in this case, if someone leaves the company, let's say under bad terms, you want to immediately remove their access to TWS and the consoles. If you're using local operating system accounts, your IT security people would have to go and clean up those local accounts. Now, if TWS and TDWC are linked to Active Directory, as soon as that account in Active Directory is disabled or deleted, that user no longer has access to TWS or the consoles, and that's something your IT security people can do extremely quickly. From a TWS administrator's perspective, if you're still using local operating system accounts on your master domain managers or backup master domain managers, and someone joins a team, you'd often have to go and update your security file to reflect this new user's rights in TWS. Similarly, if someone leaves a team, you'd update your TLS security file to remove them access. Now, if you link your TLS security files on your master and your backup master to Active Directory, you won't have to update the TLS security file in those circumstances because the access to TLS is governed by membership of Active Directory groups. If someone joins the HR team, all you would have to do is add that user to the HR Active Directory group, and they immediately get the access that the HR group gets on the master domain manager and on the backup master domain manager. There's no need to individually update the TLS security file on both because the Active Directory group membership governs it all. Now, if you've got a master and several backup master domain managers, that's an overhead of removing or adding users. if you can do it in a single point of authentication as in Active Directory, there's less tasks for you to do as an administrator. Now from a Tivoli Dynamic Workload Console point of view, if you're still using local operating system accounts, the same would apply with a new user. You'd have to create them a local account on the TWC 1, 2, 3, 4, depending on how many you've got. So there's 4 separate local accounts you'd have to create if you have 4 TWC servers. But if you link those TWC servers to Active Directory, the same thing applies. Just the membership of an AD group will grant access or remove access to your TWC servers. But if you have multiple TWC servers and you're still using local accounts, well, the permissions and the views and the preferences that a user has will be linked to a particular TWC server. So if you have TWC server 1, a user logs in, creates a task, then they log into TWC server 2, that task is not available to them because it belongs to another server. And what you can do is you can build your TWC servers as a cluster which is linked to Active Directory. So they'll have the same experience if they log into TWC server 1 or 2 or 3 or 4. The tasks that they created on 1 are available if they log into any other servers. The permissions, the views or custom views that you create for them, regardless of which TWC server they log into, they're going to have the same experience, the same menu items, the same preferences set, and they only have to maintain their accounts in Windows. They don't have to have a local account on TWC server 1, 2, 3 or 4. It's just their Windows login account that's used to access TWC. Single sign-on is a configuration you can set up between the WebSphere elements on your TWS servers and TWC servers. So what it does, it allows you to use the authentication credentials that you use to log into one WebSphere server to be passed to another server. So what I mean by that is if you log on to your TDWC server using your Windows login and password, the credentials that you use there can be passed to the other WebSphere on the Tivoli Workload Scheduler master. So you don't have to log on TWC and then connect to a remote engine like the TWS server and enter those credentials again. Using single sign-on, the credentials that you created when you logged on are used for the rest of the session. And this applies if you're logging onto the master main manager engine or a backup master main manager engine. The credentials that you use when you first log on to TWC are used for the rest of that session. It reduces the amount of time a user has to keep entering their passwords. Creating a Tivoli Dynamic Workload Console cluster and linking that cluster to Active Directory allows you to build custom views for your team. So you would have groups of teams in Active Directory, let's say a HR team, and you'd want a particular set of menu items or a particular view or some TWC branding so you can tell them which server they're logging on to. So you can build these custom TWC views for a particular set of users, and you would share those views with just your Active Directory groups. So your HR users could have one set of views, and then another group could, like your online banking group, could have a different set of Tivoli Dynamic Workload Console views and actions and tasks made available to them. So if you create a Tivoli Dynamic Workload Console cluster of 2 or 3 or 4 TWC servers and you link those to Active Directory, you can create custom views in TWC and share those views to just a subset of your users. Or you might want to share a particular TWS engine to your users, or some tasks that they want to see when they log on. Just by being a member of a particular HR group in Active Directory grants them those views and tasks and preferences regardless of which Tivoli Dynamic Workload Console server they log on to, and we'll show you that in the demonstration. So I've mentioned on the slide that IT security will love you. If you're using local operating system accounts in a typical environment, you'd have a master and a backup master, and then several TDWC servers. If you're still using local accounts, every time a user joins the company, IT security has to go and create an account on each of those servers in order to give your users access. Similarly, if they leave, they have to go and clean up the local operating system accounts on your master, your backup master, TWCs. If you link all this to Active Directory, their job has just been reduced fourfold. All they have to do is create a single account in Active Directory, and that user has access to the servers in your TLS environment. If you link your TLS and TWC environment to Active Directory, your users will thank you. If you're still using local operating system accounts, you'd have to give your users account on the master, the backup master, and your TWC servers. Now what often happens is you could say to the user, I need you to keep your password and your backup master main manager up to date, because if we're in a disaster recovery situation, you will have to log into the backup master domain manager. And if you as an administrator are dealing with a real DR event, the last thing you want is hordes of users contacting you saying, my account on the backup master domain manager, I've forgotten it, or it's not working. Can you grant me access? If you're dealing with a DR situation, that's the last thing you need on your plate. If everything's linked to Active Directory, there's nothing to worry about because the account is held in Windows. The account that a user logs onto of a morning to access their laptop, it's the same account that they're using to access TWS and TDWC. So there's no need to keep multiple local accounts on your master or backup master or TWC for your users to maintain. It increases security overall, and there's less accounts for the end users to manage. So what are the entry points into TWS? Well, there's several different options now, leaving aside the API stuff. The most common one with the Tivoli Dynamic Workload Console. So your users log into TWC server 1 or 2, and that's their front end to TWS. That's what they use to create jobs, monitor jobs, that kind of thing. Another point of entry is the Command and Composer command line. So they run command commands or to access the TWS plan, or Composer commands to access or modify objects in the database. So there's also the remote command line, which grants access to the TWS database remotely. So you can run Composer commands from a machine that isn't the master domain manager. Now the authentication method that you'd use is whatever the TLS master itself is using. If the TLS master is using local operating system accounts, those are the credentials that you supply with the remote command line. Similarly, if the TLS master is using Active Directory, it's those credentials that you would use in the remote command line. So as I touched on before, if you have a master and a backup master or several backup masters, if they're all using local operating system accounts, the overhead of using the remote command line is increased because you have to maintain local accounts on those servers. If the master's using Active Directory and the backup master is, that's where the credentials that you use for the remote command line are being held. And there's also the self-service dashboard. So part of the Tivoli Dynamic Workload Console offering for mobile users is another way that you can access the TWS plan and see the status of jobs and schedules. But whichever entry method that you use for TWS, they're all linked to the security file. The plan access to see what people can see and do in the plan through Command or TWC is governed by the security file. Similarly, the database access, can I see any objects in the database? And if I can I modify them? Can I delete them? The TLS security file controls all that. And what we're going to look at in the demonstration is that security file is linked to Active Directory. All those points of entries and all those actions and rights and roles that you need to create as an administrator can all be governed by just the membership of an Active Directory group. Your maintenance aspect, the overhead to grant, deny access to TWS and TWC when linked to Active Directory is a great deal easier. This slide is a graphical representation of what we've just been talking about, where you have multiple TWS and TWC servers in your infrastructure. So in this case we've got a master domain manager called TWS MDM, a backup master domain manager, TWS BKM, and two standalone TWC servers, DWC server 1, DWC 2. So with using local accounts, if you have a new user you have to create an account on each of these four servers. And similarly, when a user logs on to a standalone DWC server, any of the tasks that they create, any preferences or any views are local to that DWC server. So if they create a particular view on this server and then for whatever reason they log on to this other server, they're not going to see the same view that they created over here because it exists just locally on that box. And the bullet points, that requires 4 sets of local accounts. You may have more backup master domain managers, you may have split sites or DR sites, and if you're using local operating system accounts, it's an overhead for the users and an overhead for IT security to maintain and create those local accounts on each of the servers. And a real problem in a DR situation is your users are used to logging into TLS MDM, you have a disaster and you say, well, I need you to work from the backup master domain manager, and they've forgotten or they haven't kept the passwords in sync. You're often going to have people contacting you in the DR event saying, my password on this backup server doesn't work, can you reset it? If the link to Active Directory, that problem goes away. Now if you link those servers to Active Directory, There are no local accounts. There is no need for IT security to go and create local accounts on each of the 4 servers in this example. So from a user's perspective, the only account they need to know is their regular Windows account. So if they use a Windows account to log onto their laptop or their workstation in the morning, it's that same account that they're going to use to access TWS on the master backup or any of the TWC servers. And from an IT security perspective, when they come in to create or remove users, all they have to do is to add a user to a particular Active Directory group, and that grants that user the access to their masters and the TWC servers, which links in to the TWS security file. So the rights and the roles that you want to give a particular set of users, all you have to care about are they in the right Active Directory group, and the permissions and the roles in TWS and TWC apply for all 4 servers in your estate. And if somebody was come to leave, as I mentioned before, let's say somebody leaves on bad terms, you want to immediately remove their access to TWS across the piece, take them out of the Active Directory group, or disable their account, and they have no access to any of TWS anywhere. Not by command line, not using TWC or whatever. And the premise is if there's no Windows accounts, so in your IT security maintain your Windows users accounts and groups, if they don't have an account in Active Directory, they don't have access. Simple as that. And a final point before we go to the demonstration is if you cluster your Tivoli integrated portal and the Tivoli Dynamic Workload Console, which sits on top of the Tivoli integrated portal, the settings that we've had on the previous screen, so the tasks, the views, the preferences that users have on a TWC server, are now stored in a central database. And what that means is a user can log on to any TWC server that's a member of the cluster, and they will get the same tasks and settings and preferences regardless of which one they log on to, because the settings that they have are all stored in this central database. Now, as often the case, you're going to need at least 2 Dynamic Workload Console servers. You don't want to have a single one, it's a single point of failure. So you may want to add additional servers. Let's say the load, the amount of users that you're expecting to use increases. You want to bring on stream some more Dynamic Workload Consoles. If you use the central clustered configuration where the database settings are held centrally and they're linked to Active Directory, regardless of how many servers that you bring on stream, the user will still get the same experience, the same users and tasks and preferences, regardless of how many of these you create. And an extra configuration is you can load balance these servers. So what that means is instead of a user going to a particular server, so DWC1, the user comes into a single address. And the address, the back end could be hardware load balancer, it could be IBM HTTP server. And what it will do is it'll send the user to one of the members of the cluster. So you could have 4 servers in your TWC cluster. The user attaches to a single address, and the load balancer will distribute their session to one of the members of the cluster. There's lots of ways that can be achieved. I'm going to cover that in a separate video because it's a bit more involved. But needless to say, if you have a cluster that's linked to AD, no matter how many TWC servers you add, the user gets the same experience. And the management of the access to that using Active Directory groups from an administrator's perspective is very easy. So we're going to move on to the demo now, and we're going to touch on some of the points we've been discussing, whereby being the member of a particular Active Directory group dictates what access you have in TWS itself, whether you can see jobs, cancel them, rerun, that kind of thing, as well as the membership being linked to the TWC. So what views, what menu items, what preferences you get, just being the member of a particular Active Directory group will dictate what you see as a user. And because I've got a cluster of TWC servers, it doesn't matter which server a user logs into, they're going to see the same menus and preferences, that kind of things. So I've set up some use cases for this. The first case is going to be a group called the Online. So this is Online Banking. This is a fictitious group that I've created that currently has 2 members. So this group, this online group, is created in Active Directory. And what requirements do I want to give this online group? Well, I want them to only have read-only plan access. So what that means is they can only see jobs in the command commands or the TWC that are in the plan. They're not allowed to see anything that's in the database. So they can't see job definitions or schedules or event rules, anything like that. But the jobs and schedules that they see in the plan must be prefixed online. They're not allowed to see anything else. If there's 1,000 jobs on the system and there's only 10 jobs that are prefixed online, this group of users will only see jobs prefixed online. And from a TDWC perspective, they're not going to see any menu items or anything to do with reporting or event rules or any additional menu items that you get in a default TWC view, because it becomes confusing for some users. So non-technical users, they just want to see a subset of jobs and schedules. They're not interested in preferences and views and other items that would appear, and you can remove all them to make a custom view that I'm going to share with just this online group. Now in my environment, I've got 2 TDWC servers configured as a cluster. So they share a database and they're both linked to Active Directory. So I'm going to open this one up and open the second one up as well while I'm here. And the first thing you'll notice is I've put some branding on my TWC servers. So I've put my company logo. So if you're using a clustered environment, the load balancer will dictate which console a user is actually physically logging into. They'll see a single address, but the load balancer will distribute the load across multiple DWC servers. And all this branding is doing is just letting user administrator know, well, I'm actually logging into this particular machine here, or in this case I'm logging into this other one over here. Now the use case that we looked for, one of the users was called Angela Fletcher. Now this account details that I'm putting in, this is their Windows credentials that are held in Active Directory. This isn't a local account on any of the servers, it's their regular Windows account they're logging on with. I'm going to log on as that user now. So the first thing you see is the use case is this is a read-only user, probably non-technical, but what they want to do is see their jobs and schedules. So I've changed the layout of this DWC view for this set of root users to remove all the other attributes that you would get. The only items that they see in their menu is monitoring jobs. There isn't any items that talk to do with creating jobs or looking at event rules or seeing the status of workstations. I've cut down the available options to this user to the only things that there's relevant to them. It's less confusing for them and less of an overhead. So if I click on the monitor job streams, the use case that we discussed was this particular group of users should only see items that are prefixed with online. I'm going to click on all job streams in the plan, and I've got a single engine pointing to my master domain manager at the moment. Now you notice there's no credentials being entered here, it's just the engine that's being shared. So we talked about the single sign-on. With me logging into this TDWC server, I use my Windows credentials of this Angela Fletcher user, and they're going to connect to another server, another WebSphere iteration on the master domain manager. I'm not passing any credentials, but what single sign-on is going to do is allow me to connect to that remote TWS server and not have to enter in those credentials again. And you can see that using the combination of the TWS security file, I can only see jobs and job streams that are prefixed online. If I go and look at the jobs in that job stream, it's only the online ones. If I go and look at all the jobs on the servers, monitor jobs, show me all jobs in the plan. Because of the restriction in the security file, again the single sign-on is going to come into play here. I click OK. This user being a member of the online group can only see jobs that are prefixed online. And the criteria from the use case was it has to be read-only. So they can go and look at a job log, like so, and that works fine. We want to allow them to do that. But let's say this user wants to cancel this particular job. If they try and cancel it, the security file is going to step in and say you don't have permission to do cancel on this particular job. Now because this is a TDWC cluster, I've logged in to DWC1 server. If you have multiple TDWC servers in a cluster, you want to have the same experience. So I'm on the monitor job screen. Let's say, for example, this user says, well, I want to create my own task. I'm going to edit it. I'm going to call it my jobs. I want it to run against the TWS MDM engine. I'm going to save this task. This is a typical exercise for a user. They want their own jobs with their own tasks with their filters. Now what happens if they log into TWC2? This is a separate physical server, could be at the other end of the country. We're going to enter the same credentials because they're both linked to Active Directory. They're going to use the same account. Now this separate physical server that users logged into, they're seeing the same menu items that we've allowed them to see. If they go to the monitor job screen, there's the My Jobs that they've just created on the other console. So the one that they created there on TWC1 is available on TWC2. If they delete it and go over to the original TWC server, click refresh, and it's gone. So because we're using a cluster TWC server, it doesn't matter how many TWC servers I add to the cluster, the user gets the same tasks and preferences and menu items that we've decided them to have. So moving on to use case 2. Now this set of users are more power users. So they know how TWS works. They want to be able to see their jobs that belong to their business area in the plan, and they want to be able to amend job streams and job definitions in the database that belongs to their business area. So the use case criteria for this particular aspect is we want to have an Active Directory group called HR Ops that have these two members. And each of the members of this HR Ops group, they want to have read-write access to the plan and database objects prefixed HR. So it's their business area, it's their jobs. They can only update or access jobs in the database or plan if they're prefixed HR. They can cancel them, rerun them, add dependencies, that kind of things. Now, although these are power users, we don't want to give them full control of TWS. TWS is extremely powerful with the security files. So it can allow users to run jobs and run commands on servers, which may not be appropriate. One particular aspect is being able to run ad hoc commands or scripts. So this is a script or a command that doesn't relate to a TWS job. It's a command they can run on the operating system. Now, if you don't secure that in your environment, it is a security hole. There's no getting away from the fact. Particularly if you don't restrict the accounts that a user can use to submit commands or scripts on a server. So one aspect is I want to remove the ability for them to run commands on a server. So the only things this particular set of users can run are predefined jobs or predefined schedules. And those jobs that they can submit, they're not allowed to run as root. Now there is a setting in the local ops file on your TLS agents called JM no root, which dictates that any job that runs on that server cannot run as root. That's a local setting per agent. Now you could switch that on, but it means that any user, regardless if they're a power user or an administrator, cannot run jobs as root, and that may not be appropriate in some circumstances. It's an all on or all off setting. But what you can do with the security file is say, well, a certain set of groups of users that aren't administrators, for example, they cannot run jobs as root. And those two aspects, if you don't lock down your security file with them, it's something you should address. Another aspect, the TWC access, they can only see jobs in the plan or the database that are prefixed HR, so they're going to have menu items that allow them to see the workload definitions, but I don't want them to see anything to do with being able to run reports or see the event rules or the forecasting. It's not appropriate for this particular set of users to have that functionality, and rather than see them and not being able to use them, let's just take them out of the picture for them, so when they log on to TWC, they're not going to get confused or see things that aren't relevant to that particular group. So I'm going to log on as one of the members of the HR group. I go back up to my consoles. This user, this is the Windows credentials that I'm entering. So you see straight away they have more menu items than the previous read-only users, so they have the ability to manage the workload definitions and submit job streams where this menu item didn't exist for the previous users. But we're still cutting down and removing the rest of the irrelevant menu items that this user doesn't really need to see. They can still create favorites, they can list the workstations, that kind of thing. And the restrictions that we put in was they only allowed to see the objects that are prefixed HR. So we'll just return to the monitor job stream screen and log on this user. We have a single engine defined, and again there's no credentials being entered in this engine, and we're not entering any credentials, but we are connecting from TWC server 1 to this remote TWS MDM server. The single sign-on credentials are being passed across, and we are seeing a filtered set of job stream definitions in the plan that are prefixed HR. Again, with the jobs you're going to see the same thing. They're only seeing the HR prefix jobs. And because it's a power user, and we're allowing them access to their own definitions, they can take actions in the plan. So for example, by increasing the priority on a job that's waiting, because it's their job, their HR job, we allow them to give them this level of control. And you can see the priority has been increased there for this user. Now if we go to the workload definitions, manage workload definitions, the restrictions in the security file apply to the database elements. So if I search for any job stream in the database, I'm only going to see those ones that are prefixed HR. There could be 1,000, 10,000 job streams in this TWS environment, but I can only see the HR ones. This applies to the jobs. Whatever definitions you need to set up in the security file is possible. This user is only seeing the HR ones. And the other restriction that we want in the security file was they're not allowed to run jobs that have been defined that run as root. So even if a job exists that is prefixed HR, which you'd normally allow them to see and manipulate, if it has root in the definition, they're not allowed to submit the job. So I'm using TLS Web Admin simply because it's extremely easy to make quick amendments to your database objects instead of going through TWC or the composer create and composer add or replace. I want to filter on the jobs for the purposes of this. I'm going to set the filter on the jobs of the workstation. So this is the jobs that exist in the database that are prefixed HR. Just for demo purposes, I want to show you that each of these jobs is set to run as a TWS user. So the HR Active Directory group, we've said you can see anything prefixed HR, but you're not allowed to submit a job if it runs as root. So as the purpose of this demo, I'm going to just text edit that job. I'm going to change this ETL, this HR pre-SOD job to run as root. Okay, so HR pre-SOD, start out date. This one's now running as root. So I go back to the TWC console and I'm still logged on as my HR user and I search for jobs. The filtering is going to say only see things called HR pre, but the SOD, the HR pre SOD job has vanished because it's not running as root. So even if this user could see the job, which they can't because we're filtering it out in the security file, and they tried to submit it, it wouldn't allow them to, because the security file restrictions say if you run as root, you can't see it, you can't touch it, you can't submit it. And to go back to these requirements, if you're not preventing your users from doing these two things, it's something you definitely should address because it can give users more power than they need to have on a wide selection of servers. The last use case we're going to look at is we have a new starter that's joined the online banking team. When I grant them the same permissions within TWS and give them the same views within TWC as the other members of the online banking team. So we're going to use the Active Directory group membership to achieve that. And secondly, the user Helen James has left the HR Ops team. We want to revoke all access to TWS and TWC in the infrastructure so they no longer have any access at all. So to manage the group membership, I'm going to go over to my Active Directory domain controller and I'm going to go and look at the AD users and groups. So running Windows Server 2012, but you can use 2008 or 2003. So the online banking group has a new member and I want to give them the same access as the existing members. So all I'm going to do is create this new user. And creating the user ID in Active Directory. Set the password. Now this is something that your IT security people will be doing for you a lot of the cases, but for the purpose of the demo I'm just going to do it myself. So the user Ray Simpson has been created and I'm going to add them to the Active Directory online group. So now if I go to my browser, I can log on to either of my DWC servers. So I'm going to use this one, DWC2. Now all I've done is add this user Ray Simpson to be a member of the online banking Active Directory group. I haven't done anything else. I haven't changed the security file. I haven't changed any roles and permissions in TWC. So this user, because they're a member of that group, is picking up the same menu items as the other users in their business area, and the same restrictions when it comes to the security file. You notice there's going to be no credentials being added here. The only credentials that were added were the ones that we added in Active Directory. So the user accounts, they log on, they see the same restrictions in the jobs and job streams that they can see already applied, and that was enabled just by adding them to the particular Active Directory group. And the other use case was there's a user who's left the company. So just for the purpose of the demo, I'll just show this user logging on. They have their workload definitions and tasks that they would have in TWC. So if I go over to I'm going to just log out from this user, and I go to the HR group. So the user Helen James, I'm just going to disable the account. So if someone leaves the company, the first thing that usually happens is their Windows logon is disabled. And now if this user tries to log on to TWC servers, logon failed. This is DWC2. If we try one of the other DWC servers, the access is revoked across all servers. And that's the end of the demo. I hope you found it useful. If you have any questions or queries, drop me a line at the email address. The website is systemsmanaged.com. You could follow me on Twitter at @sysmanaged, and you could also subscribe to the Systems Managed YouTube channel so that when we put up new content, you'll get an email straight away. Okay, thanks for watching.